Why do some men lose interest the very moment they get what they thought they wanted? The pattern can feel almost cruel: intense pursuit, grand gestures, promises whispered in the night. And then, once closeness is given, an unexpected cooling of energy. This is not always about you, and it is not proof that you are less valuable. Often it speaks more about the hidden instincts at work inside him than about your worth. Many men are unconsciously driven by the thrill of the chase, mistaking challenge for connection. What excites them is not necessarily the relationship itself, but the act of proving that they can win. The danger is that once the victory is claimed, the sense of purpose fades, leaving you to wonder if the bond was ever real. Carl Jung would describe this as the expression of an immature animus, the masculine energy within a man that seeks validation more than true union. When undeveloped, this energy is restless, needing constant confirmation of its strength through conquest. It is less about sharing life and more about displaying triumph. This does not mean every man behaves this way, but when immaturity governs, intimacy becomes secondary to achievement. The irony is painful. The very act of opening yourself, which you may have seen as a step toward closeness, is interpreted by him as the end of a game he never intended to play long-term. Think of how many women have experienced this sharp turn. Perhaps he chased with passion, showing consistency, attentiveness, even devotion, until the moment you allowed the relationship to deepen physically or emotionally. Suddenly, messages grew shorter, plans became vague, and presence turned into absence. This pattern is not about your value diminishing. It is about his inability to find meaning beyond the challenge. For him, conquest was the goal. For you, it was supposed to be the beginning. This dissonance reveals the gap between an immature and a mature masculine energy. Psychologically, the rush of pursuit gives him a dopamine surge. It is the spark of novelty, the thrill of uncertainty, the chemical high of not knowing if he will succeed. Once certainty replaces mystery, the reward cycle changes. Unless a man has cultivated emotional depth, he may not know how to remain engaged without that initial tension. This is why conquest often leads to distance. What was stimulating in the chase feels empty in the everyday. Without a deeper connection, his interest fades as quickly as it flared. The tragedy is that what you gave in vulnerability was never met with equal capacity for intimacy. Jung's perspective helps us see the paradox clearly. The faster the conquest, the faster the withdrawal. It is not about withholding yourself forever, nor about turning love into manipulation. It is about recognizing that speed without foundation rarely sustains itself. When the relationship begins and ends in the same breath, what is revealed is not a failure of your worth, but a reflection of his undeveloped self. Your openness was real. His focus was elsewhere. This awareness invites a crucial reflection. How can you tell if his attention is driven by the thrill of pursuit or by genuine interest in who you are? The answer lies not in how passionately he begins, but in how steadily he remains. True connection is proven not in the chase, but in the consistency that follows. And perhaps the deeper question for you is this: how many times have you mistaken his conquest for love, when in truth it was only a fleeting performance of desire? Why does the excitement fade so quickly when depth is missing? For men who live only on immediate stimulation, the spark of conquest is enough to ignite interest, but never enough to sustain it. Desire without foundation burns fast and bright, leaving nothing but ashes once the initial thrill is gone. In these moments, the woman often feels discarded, as if her value was tied only to novelty. But the truth is that he was never seeking intimacy in the first place. He was chasing sensation, not connection. The emptiness you feel after such encounters is not a reflection of your worth, but of the shallow ground he was standing on. Psychologically, this confusion often comes from mistaking physical desire for emotional bond. Many men, especially those unprepared for real vulnerability, confuse passion with partnership. They are drawn to the intensity of the moment, but unprepared for the quiet work of building trust and presence. Jung's concept of the shadow reminds us that what is repressed often controls behavior unconsciously. When a man cannot face his own fears of intimacy, he projects excitement as a substitute. Pleasure becomes camouflage for avoidance, and intensity becomes a mask that hides the absence of depth. Women who encounter this pattern often sense it too late. The thrill of being desired can make it difficult to notice that there's no real listening, no curiosity about her world, no investment in her heart. The silence after the conquest feels brutal because the contrast is so sharp. One moment she is the center of attention. The next, she is left alone with the echo of promises that meant nothing. This is the psychological cost of confusing intensity with intimacy. The body is engaged, but the soul is absent. Words are spoken, but they carry no roots. Connection without depth always collapses under its own weight. The shadow at play here is the refusal to enter real closeness. For Jung, shadow is not just darkness, but the unacknowledged parts of ourselves. A man who cannot sit with his own fears will keep seeking external stimulation to avoid facing them. Excitement substitutes for true bonding, and conquest becomes an endless cycle to escape the discomfort of emotional exposure. In this sense, his loss of interest is not about you at all. It is about his inability to remain present once the thrill is gone. You may have offered presence, but he was only seeking distraction. Recognizing the signs early can protect your heart. Does he ask about your life beyond the surface? Does he create time for shared experiences outside of desire? Does he show consistency when things quiet down, or does he disappear until the next spark can be reignited? These questions reveal whether his interest is sustained or shallow. The absence of such depth is not a flaw in you, but a warning of where he stands in his own maturity. The deeper lesson here is that emptiness after conquest says more about him than about you. Where there is no inner ground, no relationship can grow roots. When a man lives only for the immediate high, his interest fades because there was never a bridge to true intimacy. And so the silence he leaves behind is not abandonment of you. It is the reflection of his own emptiness. The question that remains is whether you will continue to confuse his thrill with real presence, or whether you will choose to seek the depth your soul has always known it deserves. What separates a fleeting attraction from one that endures? The difference lies in whether desire is fueled by ego or by reciprocity. When a man sees a woman as a prize to be claimed, his attention fades as soon as possession is secured. But when he sees her as a partner, interest deepens instead of diminishing. This distinction is not always visible at first, yet its effects become painfully clear with time. Relationships based on ego are unstable because trophies cannot offer companionship. Relationships built on reciprocity, however, carry a rhythm that survives beyond the spark because they are grounded in shared respect and consistent presence. The danger is that discarded attraction often wears the mask of intensity. The pursuit may feel passionate, but its center is hollow. If he measures his worth by the conquest, then once he wins, the connection loses value in his eyes. This pattern is not love, it is performance. The woman who becomes entangled in it may mistake his attention for commitment, only to realize later that she was never truly seen. By contrast, sustained attraction is quieter, but stronger. It does not burn out quickly because it is not dependent on novelty. It grows from attentiveness, reliability, and a desire to build something lasting. Carl Jung spoke of archetypes, and here the contrast is striking. The immature lover is consumed by the need for conquest. He chases, he claims, he leaves. The mature lover, however, desires but also commits. In him, passion is not severed from responsibility. Intimacy is not separated from respect. His attraction is not about ego, but about integration, the weaving of desire with the will to nurture. When the archetype of the lover reaches maturity, he longs not only for the body but for the soul, and that longing sustains him long after the thrill of novelty fades. The key for a woman is discernment. How do you recognize whether his attraction is sustainable or disposable? Watch how he behaves when there is no conquest to chase. Does he invest when things are steady, or does his energy disappear once certainty is established? Does he listen with the intent to know you, or only with the intent to win you? His answers to these silent questions will tell you everything. A man who values you as a partner stays steady when excitement cools. A man who values only his own ego loses interest the moment novelty disappears. Real stories reveal this truth. One woman noticed that her partner's interest declined sharply after their first intimate night. His attention shrank, and his presence evaporated. Another, however, saw the opposite. After intimacy, her partner remained consistent, deepening conversations and making plans for a shared future. The difference was not in the act itself, but in the meaning he gave to it. For one, it was conquest completed. For the other, it was connection begun. The act did not reveal the truth. His behavior afterward did. Sustained attraction rests on more than fire. It rests on substance. When you look for signs of depth, you protect yourself from patterns of abandonment. When you recognize the difference between ego-driven pursuit and genuine partnership, you reclaim the power to choose more wisely. The lesson is simple but profound. Real attraction does not discard. It builds. So ask yourself, is his presence about proving something to himself or about building something with you? The answer may show whether his desire is a momentary spark or a flame meant to last. Why do some men step back just when things begin to feel real? The moment intimacy demands more than passion, when it begins to call for vulnerability, many withdraw. It is not that the feelings vanished, but that the depth required unsettles them. For some, the chase is easier than the closeness that follows. To remain present in true intimacy requires courage, and for those who have not cultivated it, retreat becomes their instinctive response. This pattern can leave you questioning your worth, but it is often less about rejection of you and more about fear within him. Carl Jung's perspective helps us understand this retreat. He spoke of the anima, the inner feminine presence within every man, which demands integration for true wholeness. When a man resists intimacy, he is often resisting this part of himself, the part that requires him to face emotions, needs, and vulnerabilities he may have long avoided. Instead of integrating, he escapes. Instead of leaning in, he pulls back. The refusal is not about the woman before him, but about his own inability to allow tenderness to exist alongside strength. This is not maturity. It is the unfinished work of his psyche. For many women, this pattern is heartbreakingly familiar. He was attentive at first, full of fire and interest, but when the relationship began to ask for honesty, steadiness, and emotional exposure, he grew distant. The woman who once felt chosen is suddenly left with silence or excuses. Yet, this retreat is not proof of her inadequacy. It is evidence of his discomfort with intimacy. Vulnerability, for him, feels like surrender, and so he trades closeness for distance. What seems like indifference is, in truth, fear. Stories illuminate this clearly. One woman recalled how her partner stopped calling regularly after she opened up about her deeper hopes for the future. Another shared that a man who once craved her presence disappeared after she expressed simple needs for reassurance. Both realized later that his withdrawal was not about lack of attraction, but about the weight of intimacy he was unprepared to carry. In recognizing this, they freed themselves from self-blame and understood the pattern for what it was: immaturity dressed as disinterest. The psychology is consistent. Where fear of intimacy reigns, avoidance becomes predictable. Jung's insight reminds us that without the willingness to embrace inner vulnerability, no outer relationship can truly flourish. A man who flees from closeness is fleeing from himself. Until he chooses integration, his relationships will remain shallow, no matter how passionately they begin. And for the woman who encounters him, the lesson is not to chase, but to observe. His retreat is not your failure, it is his unfinished journey. The deeper wisdom lies in knowing that intimacy is not something to be begged for. It is either embraced freely or it does not exist at all. True connection does not fear vulnerability, it welcomes it as proof of love's reality. So when you see him step back at the threshold of depth, ask yourself, is this my burden to carry or his truth to face? Because sometimes the greatest protection is to recognize that his silence is not about you at all. It is about the battle he refuses to fight within himself. What if conquest was never meant to be the end, but only the beginning of something far deeper? For many women, the mistake is believing that giving quickly will secure closeness, when in truth, it often shortens the journey. The real power lies not in speed, but in patience. By not rushing to hand over everything, you create space for a man's true intentions to reveal themselves. In that waiting, you discover whether he values only the thrill of novelty or whether he is willing to invest in something lasting. This is not about withholding yourself as a game. It is about honoring the rhythm of your own soul and letting time separate what is shallow from what is real. The woman who understands this does not confuse conquest with connection. She knows that intimacy is not earned in a single moment, but in the quiet repetition of presence, respect, and reciprocity. When she waits, she is not testing him, she is protecting herself. She lets the silence between gestures expose whether his desire has depth. If he remains consistent, she knows there is substance. If he fades, she knows the conquest was all he sought. Either way, her patience saves her from illusions. Jung described individuation as the process of becoming whole. For her, patience is individuation in practice, the choice to filter relationships through self-respect rather than desperation. This shift transforms conquest into construction. Instead of being swept into fleeting passion, she builds foundations that endure. The attraction she inspires is not disposable because it is rooted in something larger than ego. She embodies the archetype of the woman whole, someone who values her own journey enough to demand more than surface connection. Her magnetism does not come from what she gives away quickly, but from the dignity with which she chooses when and how to share herself. This choice changes everything. She stops being a prize and becomes a partner, not a fleeting spark, but a steady flame. Stories of women who embrace this truth often reveal the same outcome: clarity. One woman delayed intimacy, allowing time to reveal her partner's true nature. His consistency showed her that his attraction was not about conquest, but about commitment. Another discovered the opposite. His attention withered when the chase was no longer enough. Her patience spared her from deeper hurt. Both found strength in the pause, proving that restraint is not denial, but discernment. The difference between being chosen as a momentary victory or as a lifelong companion often rests in the willingness to let time test intention. And this is where individuation becomes freedom. When you understand that not every pursuit deserves completion, you reclaim your power. You no longer feel pressured to surrender your peace to prove your worth. You know that your value does not expire with patience. Instead, patience magnifies it. You transform the old narrative of conquest into a new story of construction, where intimacy is earned, not rushed, and where your voice, your silence, and your choices all work together to guard your dignity. So perhaps the real secret is this: the conquest that matters most is not his, but yours. The conquest of your own fear of being alone, the victory of choosing depth over speed, the triumph of building rather than being consumed. And maybe the only question left is, will you let the need to be claimed define you, or will you embrace the journey of becoming the woman who chooses what is truly worth building?